Okay, everyone, I'm going to leave it a few minutes in case we get anybody else. And so, welcome to Austria. I'm an Englishman in Vienna, echoing a famous song. And what I'm going to do today is to welcome people and also to give a little bit of an overview of how I've found it working in Austria over the last, I think it's 13, 14 years. But I'll just leave it a few minutes and I'll do an intro regarding who the hell I am. And I did have a PowerPoint presentation full of images of Monty Python, seriously, and Richard the Lionheart, but I'll explain more in a moment. So just let's give it a couple of minutes, and then if no one else arrives, then we'll let them come in as I continue. And this is very much going to be a Q&A or an interactive session, whatever that means. In other words, ask me any questions you like. If you've got any experiences working or trying to work in Austria, then please do say so as we move forward. I'll leave it 2 minutes and then we'll start. Okay? Good for you? It's a chill moment. It's a in the moment. Mindfulness. We are now in a mindfulness workshop. And yes, it's English humour as well, I forgot to mention. No, it's okay, because I can hold these up. No, seriously, the PowerPoint was... I'll explain in a moment about PowerPoint and my hatred of PowerPoint. Welcome. If anyone apologises, they have to leave. So no more apologies. Seriously, welcome. Actually, I'm not going to wait, because it'll all be this sort of awkward silence when everyone's sort of shifting slightly on their chairs and thinking, what are we doing here? Okay. So my name's Ian Smith. I'll do a little bit of an introduction about who I am and what I am before I talk about this. And please do ask questions as we go along. Just before I say anything else, sound okay? Thumb? Yes, the thumb is appearing. And vision? Thumb? Yeah, 2 thumbs, even better. Okay, so my name's Ian Smith and I've been dual based for quite a few years, both in Austria and the UK. And since Brexit, I am still in that same position, although having to navigated some bureaucracy to make sure that I could still do so. My background is as a musician, producer, tour manager, sound engineer, and owner and creator of 2 agencies. The 2 agencies are Fruition and Fission, and they've been working for many, many years across Europe generally and also across the world. World music, folk music, fusion, and also pop, rock, indie, alternative, no Schlager, and no hardcore pop. So what I did when I came here, the 2 agencies that I run, as I said, everything from totally unknown acts all the way through to acts like Phil Rudd from AC/DC, Francesca Gagnon from Cirque du Soleil. I've done lots of things as an independent. And so when I came here, and it was because I met my current partner somewhere else, and she's Austrian, so I ended up in Austria. So I wanted to know what I could do to explore the Austrian market when I first came here. And as I say, this is about 12 or 13 years ago. It's not necessarily easy to book into Austria as an external, or to find your way through the Austrian market and how it works as somebody from outside. Because of the range of genres and acts that I worked with, I wondered what I could do to work into this really quite rich market in terms of genre, but what seems to the outside world, and not to Austrians, but to be the Sound of Music and Mozart. And it's a lot more than that. In fact, when I first came here, I was genuinely shocked to know that many Austrians I spoke to didn't know the Sound of Music. Anybody here not know the Sound of Music? Julie Andrews, The Hills Are Alive with the Sound of Music, Doa Deer, yeah, and immediately, oh yeah, okay, but to Austrians it's unknown. But there's this idea outside of Austria, I think often, that it's not such a rich marketplace, and I have found that not to be true. It's not always easy to book, but it's not true that it's so specific. I did have some examples, and in fact the original draft for this talk was Conquering Austria. Now, given I'm an Englishman, if you don't know the history of Richard the Lionheart, all these blank faces, this is great. Richard the Lionheart, I've got a picture of Monty Python and the Holy Grail here, which you would have seen on PowerPoint, but it's a small screen, so I'll just describe it. Richard the Lionheart was arrested in Vienna in the 3rd district and then ransomed back to England. So that's how difficult it is booking shows here. Joke, really. No, what I wanted to do is give you an idea of the regions, the cities, the towns, villages, event type, and genre focus coming into Austria. You have electronica, pop, rock, indie, classical, of course, folk, roots, world music. Now, particularly because in my role for the first year here at Waves, I'm the actual UpBeat team leader, project leader, programmer. That means that part of the focus for this is about world music crossover, etc. I'm supposed to program 10 acts here for Waves, which fall into that category, emerging world music. That could be a band that's been around for years, but suddenly is breaking through. And so I'll talk a little bit about world music and folk and roots here as well as part of the conversation. One thing to say, if you don't know already, that Austria is split into several regions, and I can't read this, it's so small. Burgenland, and sorry about the accent, locals, okay? I often mistakenly say Burgerland, so I do apologise. You've got Carinthia, Lower Austria, Upper Austria, Salzburg, which is a region, for those of you that don't know, and a city, of course. Styria, Tyrol, which has a checkered history, and Vorarlberg, and a place called Vienna. So each of those regions also have some unique characteristics. Now, what I forgot to say right at the beginning, and there's a PowerPoint slide here which even I can't read, which says resources, is that after this talk, if you're interested in having anything back, I tried to avoid printing off lots of handouts on paper. Please do contact me, and I will happily send you a cheat sheet on everything I've been talking about today, digitally. So it will save having to print things off. And also, I'm going to give a very big shout out now to this organization. If you're not Austrian, you won't know what this is necessarily, but this is Mika. Anybody here not heard of Mika? See, I don't even have to say, oh, 2 people. Okay, good. I can explain what it is then. Mika is Music Information Center Austria, which has a pretty good website. In fact, excellent. Now, one thing to say, if you're trying to find out, of course, as we're all music professionals here, where to pitch your artists, on the Mika website, under regions, if you go to each of the regions and click on that region, you will be able to see a list of events and festivals with contact details. It is an absolutely excellent resource. Generally, it is as well. Music Information Center Austria is there for Austrian musicians and creatives, but it's a great resource. So I heartily recommend checking it out. Also, if you have your Google browser set to translate English, mostly it sounds okay when you're reading it. But really, don't forget that. Now, it takes a little digging around on the website because it doesn't say list of festivals and events. So you have to go to the regional page on the website in order to find that. Then you'll see a list of events. Now, as we've got a lot of professionals here today, you will know that a lot of the events in Austria, in my opinion, and please tell me I'm wrong, if I'm wrong, are quite genre specific. So, for example, I have to take my glasses. I'm not like my father now. I can't read anything unless I take my glasses off. So I've got a piece of paper here. There's a big player in Austria called Barracuda Music, or Nova. And they run a series of festivals like Frequency, Nova Rock, Lovely Days, and a festival called Butterfly Dance, which was formerly called Jazz and Blues. Now, if you check them out, you'll notice that they are quite genre specific. So Nova Rock is pretty obvious what Nova Rock is. For those of you that maybe program sometimes into UK festivals and some other festivals, you'll know that there's a broader range of genre types within those festivals. But what I've found over the years, not so much these particular festivals, is that overall there's a consistency and a conservative, I don't mean that in a political sense, a conservative attitude to how events are programmed. Not everywhere. Is this making sense? Yeah, a few people nodding, a few people looking as though they wish they were somewhere else, but they were glad they came here. It means that when you're making those approaches, you have to obviously be careful about the event that you're approaching. It is very genre specific. So if, for example, Butterfly Dance, formerly Jazz and Blues, recently I booked a Cochin, some of you will know, into Butterfly Dance. And then you'll have Parov Stella, and you'll have, I can't remember the other people who were on the bill at the time, but it is very, very specific. So remember, oh, sorry, I'll turn this off, otherwise you'll start hearing Sky News off my iWatch. Sorry about that. Just turn that off. Sorry about that. So that, I would say, be very, very careful when do your research as usual and check in on their particular websites. Again, you can get this through the Mika site as well. You also have more electronica and drum and bass, the festival like Snow Bombing. That's not run by Nova Music and Barracuda, that's a different organisation. And that, as its name suggests, is in the snow. It's mountainous and quite a cool festival. So what I'm trying to get at in giving you this information now is that you can hear already, we're far beyond Sound of Music and Mozart. In each of the towns and in each of the cities as well, places like Graz, Linz, Salzburg, Vienna, Wiener Neustadt, there are venues there which program a very, very broad range of music. Orpheum in Graz, and then in Vienna, of course, you have things like Vuk, where we were until this year. Porgy and Bess do a range of music other than mostly jazz, but they cover other things as well. I've been to a very cool few Tiger Lilies gigs there over the years. And there are lots of smaller clubs as well, and what would be closer to what we would call art centres in the UK, whereby there's a cross programming of other media types, film, theatre, dance, etc. In Vienna, there are places like Theater am Spittelberg, right in the centre of Vienna, and who program small. I think it's around about 180 in the round. And then, as you will see tonight, and over the next few days, we have got a really broad range of smaller venues. For example, on the Gürtel, like Chelsea. I'm trying not to say B52, B72. I keep calling it B52 because of my age, I guess, and the band. Then you've got Klamladen, and then really nice venues like Metropole and some of the ones we used to use for Waves over the last few years. So it's very, very broad. Any questions so far? Okay. As I said earlier, I'd talk a little bit about world music crossover. Now, one thing I have to say before I say anything else, I really hate genre titles, personally, because they mean generally very little. They're just a very handy way of people putting things into slots. The term world music, if you didn't know, was created in the mid to late 80s by the record labels. I can't remember which label did it, in order to be able to catalogue them in music shops, things we used to have called vinyl in record shops, and they actually needed a thing that said world music, and which gives you an idea of what I'm about to say. World music is music of the world. Now, it may incorporate elements of pop, electronica, indie, local culture. And in that sense, there is a market here in Austria for world music. And I'm not talking about stereotypical world music like the shows that you sometimes see, like Africa advertised everywhere, which, I mean, it's got a very good reputation. But what I'm talking about is that if you're trying to market world music, there are opportunities to do so. The venues I've mentioned so far, Theater am Spittelberg or Firm in Graz, there are venues in Linz, in Innsbruck, and I'm going to mention a few Austrian acts now that fall very much into that category. Anybody here know Atwenger? Yeah, one. John Peel loved Atwenger. John Peel? I'm looking at a younger audience. John Peel was a very, very, very famous BBC radio DJ from the UK. In fact, until recently, one of the stages at Glastonbury was named after him. He was a massive fan of Atwenger, well, big fan. Then you have bands like Ruskaya, originally called Ruskaya, now changed the name. Double Standard, who cover sort of alternative electronic reggae. Then you have Deladap, who have morphed from electro swing into other things. Older bands like Netnikism, who still work. Fatima Spa and the Freedom, that's so hard to say, man. Fatima Spa and the Freedom Fries, and a number of others. So these are bands that had a relatively successful time in Austria. Certainly Atwenger are still going. They've published albums, they've published films. What was Ruskaya was a very, very well-known Russian vibed band. Obviously, in the last 18 months, for the horrors that we're experiencing at the moment, they've changed their name and moved slightly. But very much world music bracket. They played in the UK several times at world music festivals. And they all have a market here as well. Double Standard, reggae, etc. So what I'm trying to say is, from my perspective, I've worked with many of these guys as well. There is that market here. Certainly in terms of club shows, and in certain situations in festival shows as well. So I'm going to move on now to, how can I put it, channels to get your music or whatever you're doing out there. Obviously with print medium, that's pretty much died, except for one magazine called The Gap. If you don't know it, it's also got an absolutely excellent website. It's an Austrian publication, and very good indeed. I actually went on it last night just to check where we were with what they're doing, and there's a very nice piece on this thing called Waves. So I'd recommend checking that. It's called thegap.at. Like other print medium all over the world, particularly UK as well, we've lost most, if not all, print music magazines. Still, yeah, I mean, we were talking about this earlier. This is my good friend Paul, I planted him in the audience. No, it's not true. We were talking about this earlier, in that now it's ironic that when we used to, back in the day, have fanzines, small publications that maybe had a 50, 100, 200 circulation, which disappeared over time as things became more professional. What has happened now because of web medium, you have the same situation here in Austria, where there are small runs of small magazines, but the main magazine for music, certainly in the Vienna area, is the Gap.at. So you could get your music and your publications to that, because you hit print and you also hit web. The same is true, not the same is true. You also have, of course, another outlet for your music here in Austria, which is ORF. FM4, English translation of FM4, sorry. And obviously those, ORF, if you don't know, is of course similar to the BBC. It's a national broadcaster, Österreicher Rundfunk. And they are very, very important outlets. And FM4, as well as the independent radio stations like Superfly, etc. There is a very broad range of these available. Again, if you email me, I'll leave a stack of cards here afterwards. I will send you, I'm not data harvesting your emails, by the way. Trust me, I don't need any more emails. But if you want the information in an easy to digest digital format, I'll do that afterwards. So you also have still print newspapers, of course. I'm going to mention four now. There's the Standard, which I suppose you could say that's similar to the Guardian if you're English. Kronen Zeitung, which is not anything like the Guardian at all. Then you have the Courier and Die Presse. So you have these print medium, and they still do have music journalists, or at least culture and creative arts journalists. So you still have an opportunity to hit that market via a coordinated effort with print, web, and radio. TV programs, not so much that I've experienced. The TV, in terms of musical programming in Austria that I've seen, and I can only speak from personal experience, has mainly been classical, some small programs on niche music, and a lot of Volksmusik and some Schlager. Does everybody know what Schlager is? This is sort of resigned, yeah. It's I was told, was it? I can't remember. Was it Jeroen? Yes, Jeroen told me. My good friend who's in the room said Hansi Hinterseer has retired. It means nothing to anybody. That's great. He was one of the kings of Schlager. Schlager is that middle of the road. Anyway, music that is still very popular, to be honest. Hey, look, if anybody here is representing Schlager, it's a good market. Anybody representing Schlager? Somebody said, I'm good then. No, okay. So in terms of what I've experienced on certainly TV media, I've not seen a lot. You'd see the Volksmusik programs. There have been quite a few. I'm trying to remember. I can't remember the guy's name. But there are limited opportunities. I've got a message. Okay. Please focus on me, no one else. Okay. So there is an opportunity there to use that. It's both local and national, and then there are regional, smaller radio stations, internet radio stations, which you can hit upon as well. Where are we so far? Any questions? When is this going to finish? Is the whiskey's tasting on yet? No, that's in another 15 minutes. Now, I never expected this session to maybe last for an hour, to be perfectly honest. And I was asked to do this in order to give an overview of how you could work well within the Austrian market. I have done okay, personally, through my agencies. And I can't really say anything else except to say it's really, really important to research your market, of course. Everybody in here has done that. But specifically, I found in Austria, there is a little resistance sometimes from someone who is not necessarily from the same culture. I'm English, so it may just be me. It could be a resistance, and this is pre-Brexit. I'll just make that very, very clear. And I know from talking to other people, sometimes people have found it a little bit opaque, trying to work out how to get into the marketplace. Touring-wise, if you can get a small tour here, it's really cool. There's some, for say a small club tour, as I said before, you've got Vienna, Graz, Innsbruck, Salzburg, and there's some really nice venues in Salzburg as well, where I've been several times. Just check my notes. Any questions? There's very, very little more I can explain other than what I've said so far. If anybody would like to get a digital, not a transcription of what I've been saying, but if anybody wants to get a list of what I've been talking about, both in terms of links to, forgot something. The one thing that I often do when I'm trying to work in another territory is to check out the export office in that territory. Now, it sounds a bit counterintuitive, but it's not. Austria has a very good music export office and is very proactive. So if you're working with any Austrian artists, it's very important, of course, or not just Austrian artists, it's important to look at what that export office is also doing for its own artists. Of course, their key role is to promote Austrian creativity and culture and music. So I would say really check them out as well. Check Mika out, Music Information Centre Austria. Very simple, easy to find, and as I say, a very, very good resource. And I'm not sure there's much else I can say right now, unless there are, as I keep saying, any questions. Anybody? Is anybody going to the whiskey tasting? One person, two per... And now anybody who's held that hand up has to speak now. No, I'm kidding. I'd just like to say thank you very much for coming to this short and concise, and I hope it's been informative. As I say, I've been here a long time, and things like fees, etc. It's just the same as anywhere else in terms of not in terms of the type of fees. Obviously, that changes from place to place, but certainly in terms of the deals you can do. It's just the same. You can do guarantees versus splits, etc., percentage deals. And often, I would say this, if you're trying to promote your artist here into Austria, certainly the smaller venues in places like Vienna, like the ones you'll come to this evening, except Metropole, that's the big one, they are very, very open to you bringing your artist there. Often it's a door split, and there's one other thing I didn't say, which astonished me when I first came here. I came here, I'm talking about Vienna, but I think you can say it's the same in several other of the bigger cities. People would come in to do a Freispende, so just give what you want. And the English expression is gobsmacked. Absolutely gobsmacked at the amount of money people were getting. I've done shows in Vienna whereby it's totally Freispende, so you give what you like, and I've had 3-4 piece bands do a smallish bar and they've come away with €1,000. No kidding. I mean, obviously you have to promote it, and I'm not talking about necessarily the venues that are the sort of regular stuff that's happening all the time, but it can be very, very lucrative. So it's unlike, do that in London or somewhere else, you don't always get a very good fee at the end of the day. So there is that culture of people being willing to contribute some money to the artists without it being a set fee at all. I'm not talking about general programming, but if you want to drop in a few filler gigs for your artists, it's really good. Not all the time, doesn't happen all the time, but certainly on quite a few occasions I've had bands earning quite a lot of money just on a free contribution basis in Austria, and I have not had that in many places around Europe in terms of the audience being willing to pop into their pockets to do that. The other thing to say, which I've not mentioned yet, there are a lot of record labels in Austria, or relatively speaking, and of course Austria is the centre for many years of pressing vinyl, etc. So in terms of, actually there's a whole different subject I wasn't going to cover, but I'll just cover it slightly. Of course we have Red Bull in Austria, and Red Bull Music, etc. In terms of publishing, they publish music as well, of course. In terms of publishing, there's a very strong publishing base and labels base here. If you're looking to, I'm not talking about distribution necessarily, and of course I'm talking about digital as well, it's really worth checking out. Whether or not they're going to be willing to take your artist, if they're a non-Austrian artist, is another question, and they are just as professional as anywhere else, and it's a very interesting market in terms of that, and certainly still physical product and vinyl having made its comeback. The thing is, if you come here, like any market, depends on the marketplace of people wanting to buy things, physical product really sells here, certainly in Vienna, really well. I've seen vinyl selling for 40, 50 euros a pop, and really, really well. And people still buy CDs. It's a market where an older market, and I'm not talking about young market, but obviously there's an older market there who still want to buy CDs regularly. The shows that I go to, and they're not just folk roots and world music, classical shows, people selling merch and T-shirts, etc. It is still a good market for merchandise if you're sending people over. Question, I think. Hang on.
It's about vinyl production, because I'm currently got my vinyls in production, and I think about how I should distribute them, because I thought I'm a newcomer artist, like not too many people are gonna like storm the markets when I release. So I thought I might sell them just by myself privately. Would you do that, or would you still give it to like a distributor here in Austria to?
Can I join in on this one?
Hang on. So I'll just have to repeat what you said. So new artist, relatively new releasing artist, and the question was, should you self-release rather than give it to someone else to distribute and release, possibly?
I do release by myself, but I'm just talking about the product, the vinyls themselves.
Okay.
What I would say is be careful. How many are you pressing up?
Paul, I'll tell you what, take a microphone because no one can hear you.
Okay. Not too close. So, what quantity are you planning to press? 280. The thing with physical distribution now is you get charged for storage. Yeah. So bear in mind, whatever you give them per unit, I know in the UK, Universal used to charge me 4p a CD, which is maybe what, 6 cents or something like that, for each copy per month. So whatever you give them, if it's not selling, that you will be charged for that. So, and the other thing is who they will necessarily sell it to, because if you're, I don't know how well known you're known in the regions or whatever. What you can do now is approach record shops directly, and sometimes you can do a deal where they'll if they sell it, they'll pay you, and they'll return it if they don't. So you can do it yourself. You can more or less just call up some shops and say, will you take some sale or return CDs for them? And that way is probably more effective than going through a distributor, because you will be in their list of what they're trying to push that week. That world of distribution is should we say, it's hard work. Anyway. Sorry.
It's okay, just to bring it back slightly to the Austrian angle, because obviously that's a general point. My advice always to artists, because I've been an artist manager, producer, and all sorts of other things, is if you can do it yourself, do it yourself. Don't pay anyone else. Not until you're at a point where it makes sense. Now, if you're talking about the Austrian market per se, and you're talking about vinyl, yeah, then if you're only having 280 pressed, do it yourself. Absolutely. I mean, if you think, as I was mentioning earlier, one of the good things about Austria is it's a small place, relatively speaking, and the market, relatively speaking, is small when you compare it with Germany or France or whatever. So the deal is, if you can get a label that is genuinely willing to help you market that product within this market and then move out further, because of the nature of the size of the market and the way it's connected with press, media, etc., it's a good idea. But you have to balance that out. If you're talking about pure economics, no, that's you. You take as much as you can because you've invested a lot, time, energy, money. If you're trying to use the Austrian market and then use that as a stepping stone to other markets, it's a great idea. As long as you find a good label and publishing and distribution. But that is a totally different conversation. But what I would say is certainly because of Austria's position in the milieu generally, it can be a very good thing. Certainly in the German-speaking world as well, of course. I mean, there is an edge, an angle to that, which makes sense. If you're working in English or other languages, then obviously it may be better to look in a different way about distribution. But going back to your original question about vinyl, yeah, if it's purely about economics, keep it yourself. If you want to think about just giving some of that product run as promo to via labels who might license it later if it does well, but they'll not do it unless you're doing well anyway, and then they'll work after your success. That's the reality. That's my experience, that's my cynical experience, but not just Austria, that's general. Any other questions? I think that's almost perfect because we're very close to the whiskey tasting that starts at 4:15. And I can see in your eyes the people who are going to that and thinking, how's this going to work? Actually, Olaf's a very good friend of mine, the guy who's running it, so I know what time it starts. I'd like to thank you all for sitting, listening to me mumbling on. And I have a great time in Austria. As I say, I split my time between the UK and Austria, and I work all over the place. It's a bit of a weird situation for me because I'm a licensed sponsor as well, so for UK work permits and things. So it's all gone a bit weird in terms of my connections across Europe. But I would say Austria, genuinely, and I'm not being paid to say this, I love the place. It's great. And particularly Vienna, it's so vibrant. It's got a lot going off in it, except after 10 o'clock at night in the centre, and they tell everyone to go inside, which is bizarre and weird, and I don't mind who sees me saying this. I'm sorry, Vienna. 10 o'clock at night is too early on a Saturday night in the middle of the summer to tell everybody to go inside and stop making noise. And particularly to the people last year who reported waves when we were outside on the pavement at a Portuguese cafe and the police came to try and stop us making any noise. This is to you as well, and I hope whoever's watching this streaming and it was you think again next time. So thanks a lot, everybody, and I hope you enjoyed it. Ciao.